I'm going to keep quiet on Bitcoin until the tape tells me that it's time to be loud again. It's time to be loud again.
If you've been sleeping on Bitcoin, it's time to wake up. 22%. That's how much Bitcoin ripped in the last couple days. And according to Jordie Visser, this wasn't just another week. It was historic.
So far, this is a 7 sigma week in Bitcoin. There's only been 3 in the last decade that were greater than 5.
We just experienced a type of statistical move that Bitcoin has only done 3 times in the last 10 years. And here's where it gets interesting, because the biggest catalyst hasn't even happened yet. The Clarity Act is still sitting in Washington awaiting a vote. Institutional money is just starting to pour back into the ETFs. Something big is happening. Ray Dalio, who's been one of the biggest critics of Bitcoin, is now saying that people should invest into Bitcoin. And 5 days from now, Bitcoin could get the biggest boost that it's ever seen, because the Fed Chair Kevin Warsh presents in Jackson Hole for the first time. If he signals easier money, things could get absolutely nutty. Today we're going to answer 2 questions. Why did Bitcoin jump 22% in the last few days? And is this rally sustainable, even if Kevin Warsh is more hawkish than people expect? If Jordie is right, and I think he is, it's time to get loud again. This is Dante Cook with Bitcoin Simply. Let's go. Before we talk about $77,000 Bitcoin, I want you to hear this clip.
We had a guy call it worth less than a bucket full of piss, is what he called it. That was at 58,000. That was right at 58,000. And it's a guy who's been, a perma bear in a lot of different areas. And that was enough for me to think this is a great time to buy.
My guy Joe Kernan says that he knows someone that says Bitcoin wasn't worth a bucket of piss. That and Jim Cramer saying he sold all his Bitcoin should have been all of the ammo that you needed to back up the truck. But that dude was probably one of the big money players who got wiped out, because Bitcoin moved from 63,000 to 72,000 like that. And that means someone probably got caught off sides with a huge short position. This is Bitcoin Simply, so I'm going to explain to you what it means when they say traders get wiped out who were short. When people are bearish or negative on an asset, they can take what's called a short position. They can borrow shares which are sold immediately by an exchange. You can do this illegally if you're a market maker and do what's called a naked short, but that's not here or there for this episode. Traders were piling into short Bitcoin positions with all of the negative news. The war in Iran, the Clarity Act not being passed, Michael Saylor and Strategy selling Bitcoin. They were expecting Bitcoin's price to continue going lower. But when the price goes against you, exchanges need to call those shares that you borrowed short, and they sell them, which creates higher prices, and then more short traders get liquidated, creating a waterfall, which is exactly what happened. This was the largest short squeeze since November of 2024, which registered just 5.38 according to this research analyst, and this one was 6.94, a short squeeze for the ages. But it wasn't just a short squeeze. It was the big players, the big institutions, Fidelity and BlackRock getting back into the game. Of the 20 largest inflows within a week into Bitcoin ETFs, this one was 18th. So this means, although it was big, we're just getting started. But there's something bigger going on. And when Jordie speaks, I tend to listen. This is why what he said caught my attention.
Bitcoin needs to be in people's portfolio because it is a hedge against abundance. It cannot be destroyed because it is built on beliefs. Beliefs that it will have a store of value, just like gold, except for one thing. It's digital. And so I think everyone needs to adjust their views. And my job has always been, I'm going to keep quiet on Bitcoin until the tape tells me that it's time to be loud again. It's time to be loud again.
He's been the one saying that he's going to wait for the tape. He's going to wait for things to meaningfully change before he gets back onto the bull of being a Bitcoin bull again. But he said it's time to get loud again. But there's one thing that could be standing between Bitcoin's price right now and another massive bull market, and that's Kevin Warsh. In 5 days, the biggest play in macro theater is happening. The Fed chair goes and speaks at the Jackson Hole, and the market moves wildly based upon what he says or what he doesn't say. 3 potential outcomes. Does Warsh blink and actually cut rates from 3.75% to something lower? Well, if that happens, Bitcoin goes to the moon. But here's 2 other scenarios. He tells the markets that inflation is dangerous, then yields are going to climb, the dollar's going to strengthen, and rates actually go up. That's a possibility. Another possibility is he says nothing and we continue to chop sideways. But I'm completely okay with that. This has been one of the most negative periods in Bitcoin's history, and Bitcoin's been unaffected.
The tape doesn't lie. And the one thing that had been going on is, despite everything that was happening, Bitcoin was acting better. It was handling bad news. We had the hacking into a wallet. We had Michael Saylor selling Bitcoin. We had all kinds of negative news, Clarity Act not getting through. And yet it was still trading well.
But I think us focusing just on Kevin Warsh's words is too short-sighted. We talk about the macro play and Bitcoin being a macro asset, which has been a theme I've been highlighting over the past couple weeks. The United States is sitting on top of a debt problem, and Scott Bessent himself even recognizes that there's de-dollarization. What's actually happening is the hen is coming to roost. America's leaders have had a lack of leadership in terms of the debt problem. They've been communicating the American dream, which has been a lie. Listen to what Luke Roman has to say about this.
I would sit down with the American people like a fireside chat, and I would say, listen, something that is extraordinary is going to happen over the next month. And the reason it's happening is because your leaders have been lying to you for 80 years, 90 years. They told you you could have free stuff and never pay the cost. And that's a lie. There's no such thing as free stuff forever. And I'd run through, I'd say what I said to you. The 70 million baby boomers were born from 1946 to 64. And yet your leaders pretended like they were never going to turn 65. They were always more interested in themselves than in doing what is best for the country. And as a result of their lack of courage, followed by the lack of explanation and courage around Medicare, Medicaid, the lack of courage around Vietnam, the lack of courage around the Iraq War, the lack of courage around the bailouts and how they were handled politically, the lack of courage around COVID, which we're seeing in a big way. Those people lied to you. I'm not going to need a lot of help convincing people that their government has been lying to them badly for 90 years. Here's what's going to happen, American people, as a result of the lies your government has told you for the last 90 years. We're going to get rid of the debt. Doing so is going to be inflationary. The effects of this are going to be very inflationary. However, the inflation is not going to be evenly distributed. It is going to be most painful to those areas of the U.S. economy and world that benefited most from this arrangement: Washington, Wall Street, and retirees. And it is going to be least painful for those who were hurt most by this arrangement: the working class, the middle class, wages.
This is probably the most important clip of the episode. Luke makes a simple point. There is no such thing as free stuff. Someone eventually has to pay. Government spending has to get paid for in one of three ways: taxes, borrowing money, or printing new money. That's it. There's no fourth secret. And when the debt gets large enough, politicians have to choose between one of these three options: send you the bill, which is unsustainable and unfeasible; dilute your money; or kick the can down to your kids to pay a higher price. You don't need to be a Bitcoiner to understand this. You can actually think Bitcoin is rat poison squared like Charlie Munger. If you don't believe that the debt problem is a problem, then you believe in the tooth fairy.
Well, if you believe that, you believe in the tooth fairy. Because then we don't have to have any more taxes ever. We'll just print money and live happily ever after. It obviously won't work.
So
there comes a point when printing money is counterproductive.
Are we at that point? Are you concerned?
No, I don't think we are at that point. But nobody knew where the point was going to come. And we don't know now. None of these people who are so pompously sure of things, because we all want reassurance, and so they provide it. But nobody really knows how much of this is too much.
If debt doesn't matter, then why do we have taxes? Nayib Bukele says it perfectly in a clip from a few years ago. They do it just to play the game, the charade. If you want free healthcare, print the money. If you want to go to war, print the money. What about Social Security? Well, that's going to run out. Print the money. What about Medicare? Oh, not enough money to pay for all these people living longer. Print the money. That obviously doesn't work. There needs to be truth, checks and balances, and accountability in what we all work for every single day and what they're able to create out of thin air. As Jack Mahler says, no one should work for something that can be created out of thin air, which is the money problem that we have in general. Do you think politicians are just going to bow out and stop when we reach that boiling point? That never happens. We've given you the history if you subscribe to this channel. We're going to point you to some sponsors to allow you to be ready when and if the debt collapse happens. Ledn. They allow you to be your own bank. You don't sell a sovereign asset, you borrow against it. This is what rich people do. Elon Musk holds a bunch of assets in stock, and he doesn't sell them, he borrows against it. That's his liquidity and that's his net worth. For people like you and me who've been stacking Bitcoin, you don't sell your Bitcoin. You borrow against it with an institutional grade lender that allows an everyday person like you to do the same thing that the richest people in the world have always done. Ledn allows you to borrow up to 50% loan to value of your Bitcoin stack in a matter of hours. There's no credit check. There's no capital gains tax. You borrow against your Bitcoin stack, and weeks like last week when it continues to run up, your debt is being paid down by the asset itself. Get started with Ledn if you don't want to sell your Bitcoin and you want to do it in a responsible way. You can also remove yourself from the financial system by holding your own keys, by becoming sovereign, by setting up a trust, by making sure that your heirs and people behind you know exactly how to manage your Bitcoin when you're not there. Well, that's what the team at the Bitcoin Way is for. You get a coach, you get an outside third party to tell your Aunt Susie that you're not crazy. This is how you manage your money. Schedule a free 30-minute meeting with the team at thebitcoinway.com if you want to take the next step in your journey as a sovereign individual. All right. When some of the most respected macro investors in the world are beginning to talk about the debt problem, well, then you should pay attention. And one of those guys that just came out and started doing more and more interviews this past week was Ray Dalio. He said the Japanese yen crisis is an actual thing. We're at the beginning of one of these debt collapses and debt cycles that he talks about in his book with the loop that goes backwards in time. You can't go backwards in time with the loop. That's my only beef with his image in his chart. But nonetheless, he says that he expects non-government produced monies like gold and Bitcoin to do well, and that you should hold some in your portfolio. He says the debt problem isn't unique to America. UK has a debt problem. China has a debt problem. Clearly, Japan has a debt problem. And eventually, debt restructuring requires some form of financial repression and currency devaluation. And Dalio believes that we're just at the beginning.
How are we going to solve this problem?
We're going to do it the way that we always do it, and it's always done when countries essentially go broke. What they do is they, through a combination of devaluing the currency, printing of money, there's an imbalance. They print money, devalue the currency, and create an artificially low interest rate so that the person who's holding the bonds is receiving an artificially low interest rate. That's the way Japan has done it with their local, and that's the way we will do it.
So in other words, my grandchildren and great-grandchildren not yet born are going to be paying off this debt in devalued dollars, more or less.
It's going to happen faster than that.
Faster than that.
So if you think about the episode, Luke Roman started off by saying someone has to pay. Charlie Munger says that it's inevitable that someone will pay. And what number is responsible debt number? 40 trillion, 50 trillion, 60 trillion? And Ray Dalio says own something that they can't print. They're giving you the playbook. Let's get this back to Bitcoin specifically. What is another bullish thing on the horizon that can add to this 22% rally, showing you that we're just at the beginning? Well, the Clarity Act itself passing. It goes to vote on September 15th through the Senate and through Congress. And they're getting pressure all the way from the top that this will pass. Here's a clip from Jordie Vance.
The Clarity Act, okay? Not a lot of people have been covering this, but you know, the Crypto Clarity Act would give a lot of, dare I say, clarity to the crypto investment scheme. And you're talking about tens of trillions of dollars of potential investment that could literally make millionaires overnight. Do we have any notion of when that's going to clear the Senate where it is sitting right now?
So I was actually hopeful it would clear the Senate before the August recess. You know, we certainly think we're going to get a vote on it. There are a couple of senators on the GOP side who are holding out, and also a couple of Democrats who are stalling this thing. So we've got to do some work with our Senate colleagues, both Democrats and Republicans, to get it done. Man, you're absolutely right. This is a very important piece of legislation. The reason why America has led in crypto and blockchain innovation is, of course, because we've had a president who has supported American innovators. But what those innovators are telling us now is that the industry is mature enough that we need some clear rules. It's a bit of a wild, wild west out there. And actually what that allowed in that wild west was for the Biden administration to go after our innovators because there weren't clear rules, which just empowered the weaponized DOJ to go after some of our entrepreneurs and our innovators. We need some clear rules. These guys want to follow the rules, but they need clear guidance. The crypto industry is behind this. The small tech companies are behind it. It's a very, very important piece of legislation. We're working on it every day, and we're just going to have to see how the vote ultimately shakes out, but I feel good about it.
After years and years of regulatory ambiguity, there's now going to be some clarity in the system, which is going to allow institutions and other people to invest heavily into the Bitcoin, into the crypto industry. Let me give you one clip that's been popping up this week that I think is super interesting. Here's a clip from Scott Bessent. Back before he was the Treasury Secretary of the United States and playing the game, he was just investing his money. He owned his own hedge fund, and he bet heavily on currencies and understood the global foreign markets better than anyone else in the world. And he already said the shift of de-dollarization was happening before he was on the other side of the table.
There is clearly a slow motion de-dollarization going on, but could the initial stages be a dollar rally because companies, countries are paying back their dollar debt? So there's a dollar thirst before there's a dollar boycott.
Well, you can't see my sheet of questions, but as we move to investment themes, number one is de-dollarization. So you already jumped in there. So how do you think about taking that idea, which I guess many people would say isn't controversial, that the dollar loses, if not its hegemony, its relative status? How do you think about the journey ahead, and how do you think about, as an investor, when is the right time to build your positions?
Again, we look for stress in the system. We just did a 3-day offsite here in London, and I came away thinking we had these kind of meta long arc ideas, and the challenge here is, as you just said, where to implement them as actionable market ideas. You see things happening on the margin. This Shanghai Gold Exchange, very interesting. We see India and China being able to pay for oil, which is the ultimate dollar commodity, and the rupees and RMB. So you've now moved the U.S. out of the way. So, and I'll tell you, is the real wake-up call for me was last December. And we were doing a call with one of our consultants, the much older fellow, great thinker, and French. And he said, look, I was used to, okay, the U.S. has sanctioned Venezuela, the U.S. has sanctioned Russia, U.S. has sanctioned Iran. And he said, it is untenable that the U.S. can extend its foreign policy to the French government via the dollar. And just this huge multi-billion-dollar fine on BNP is going to make a U.S. ally want to think of a new way of doing business. So, like you have this new term, the global South, that wants out of the dollar system. Very interesting if French Republic wants out of the dollar system.
Countries are beginning to move around the dollar to create another system. He said Russia's biggest mistake was that they sold their currency for euros and didn't put it into gold. He understands the value of hard assets. And he even talked about Satoshi Nakamoto in a tweet. There's going to be a dollar squeeze at first, but eventually countries are going to find alternatives. And America is in the process of building its own financial system outside of the regime that we have. And I believe that system will have Bitcoin, because even Scott Bessent understands that the dollar's reign as the global reserve currency is waning. The de-dollarization on the global scale is happening. And that's why Bitcoin matters. People tend to make Bitcoin complicated. They talk about M2, they talk about halving cycles, they talk about ETFs, they talk about hash rate, they talk about all of these things. The big question is this: will the government print more money? If the answer is yes, then you need to own a non-government backed money like Ray Dalio is talking about. And we believe that the best horse in this race is Bitcoin because it's digital. There's 21 million Bitcoin. So it doesn't matter what Kevin Warsh says at the Jackson Hole speech. Doesn't matter what the interest rate policy is. If you do believe in the tooth fairy, well, that's up to you. But the debt actually does matter, and it's coming to roost. And when it does, they're going to either have to implement financial repression or debt and currency devaluation. Either way, Bitcoin wins. That's why this 22% rally is just the beginning. The debt problem didn't go away with Bitcoin at 63,000, 58,000, 125,000, or where we're at today at 77,000. It's still there. And therefore, it still has to be accounted for in your portfolio and your thesis. How much are you allocating to Bitcoin? I want to hear in the comments. And I want you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Tens of thousands of you watch these videos every day and aren't subscribed. We'd love you to be a part of the Simply family, where we drop fire content like this 7 days a week. Check out the Dickie Dollar episode from Rustin yesterday. Content you won't see or hear anywhere else. This is Dante Cook with Bitcoin Simply. And if you want to continue stacking Bitcoin in a way that allows you to maintain your sovereignty and buy sats cheaper than you can on exchange, well, consider a Bitcoin miner. But don't do it yourself. Don't look up these DIY YouTube videos. Work with a partner like SAS Mining. You send them your money, they buy you a machine. They hook it up, they repair it, they maintain it, they send you sats straight to your wallet, and a report every single month that you can take to a tax accountant and advisor and get a write-off. Something to consider. Use the QR code to get started with SaaS mining today. This is Dante Coca, Bitcoin Simply. It's time to get loud again. Happy stacking.